Okay, we are ready. Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Hasidut. We are continuing our series on Maaseh Merkavah, the workings of the Chariot. For those who are coming into the class and haven't been at the previous ones, we are studying the first chapter of Ezekiel, Yechezkel, and this, I believe, is our sixth class. So up to now, we've dealt with the first 14 verses. And what we're going to do tonight is the following, and also what is going to come after that. The first chapter has 28 verses. So we've done half of the first chapter. Tonight, I'm going to read in English the remaining 14 verses of the first chapter and the first two verses of the second chapter. And then I'm going to go and share with you some of the commentaries. As we've discussed, some of these descriptions are extremely difficult to understand, even on what's called a pshat, simple level. When I read it in English, you'll see why. It's just not so clear what he's describing. But we're going to go through this, some very, very important commentaries that'll help us understand. And then we're going to concentrate on, there are two types of angels that are being described. Already we have been introduced to one set of angels called Chariot, which means living beings. And those are the living beings that had an image of a human being, but had four faces: an ox, a lion, an eagle, and a human face, and had four wings. And so we delved into this substantially, the importance of the number four and the deeper meanings of what is being described here in Maaseh Merkavah. But we've never really gone deeply into who are these Chayot, these living beings. And then a second type of angel is introduced in these verses, and they are called the Ophanim, which means wheels. They're called wheel angels. So again, of course, we're going to have to understand that. But as I read this in English, I've made the point many times that the word chariot never appears in his vision. And yet, what we're going to read tonight, and especially the commentaries I'm going to read, is here, all of the commentaries picked up on that what is being described here is a chariot-like, machine, structure, paradigm, model. And here we're going to see why this chapter became known as Maaseh Merkavah. Up to now, we haven't had that feeling so much of this structure called the Merkavah. But in these verses, we are going to see that and delve deeply into it. So I'm going to start, for those who have a text open. We're starting on the 15th verse of the book of Ezekiel. So it says like this: Then I gazed at the Chaya angels, and behold, there was a single Ophan angel on the earth near the Chaya angels. One was on each of its four faces. So here we have these two sets of angels that are corresponding to each other. The appearance of the Ophan angels and their actions was like a vision of topaz. All four had a single form, and their appearance and actions were as if there was an Ophan angel within an Ophan angel. This is something that we've talked about already. We talked about it in three different ways, as the idea of fractals, the idea of interinclusion, and the idea of enclothement. But here we see it directly in the text, an open within an open, a wheel angel within a wheel angel. They moved on their four sides as they went. They did not turn as they went. They had high backs and were filled with fear. The backs, fear here means awe. The backs of all four were filled with eyes. Now, obviously, this is highly symbolic of his description here. We're going to want to understand as much as we can. The 19th verse, when the Chaya angels moved, the Ofen angels went near them. When the Chaya angels rose from the earth, the Ofen angels were also lifted up. Here we're starting to get this idea of a chariot, of a moving vehicle because of the wheels. The 20th verse, whenever the Ruach spirit of the Chaya angels had to go, the Ofen angels were taken. They were lifted up beside them because, and this is very, very important, because the Ruach, the spirit of the Chaya angels, was in the Ofen angels. Up to now, we've described them as two separate entities. When the Chaya angels lifted themselves up, the Ofen angels lifted themselves up. But then it's saying something obviously deeper, this idea of interinclusion, of enclothement, where the spirit of the Chaya angels were actually in the Ofen angels. The 21st verse, when one went, so went the other. When one stood, so stood the other. When they were lifted up from the earth, the Ofen angels were lifted besides them. And then it repeats, for the Ruach, the spirit of the Chaya angels, was in the Ofen angels. Again, we will just do our best to explain the deeper meaning of what is happening here. The form above the heads of the Chaya angels, now it kind of shifts focus. The form above the heads of the Chaya angels was that of a firmament, looking like a fearsome ice spread out above their heads. Under the firmament, their wings were straight out, one towards another. For each individual, two covered them, and for each individual, two covered their bodies. Remember, there were four wings altogether. The 24th verse. Then I heard the sound of their wings, like the sound of many waters, like the voice of the Almighty when they went. Now, so here we see that this vehicle, this chariot, this structure is moving, and its movement is making sound, the sound of many waters. And those many waters was like the sound of God. The sound of their tumult was like the sound of an armed camp. In other words, there was a lot of sound here. When they stood still, they let down their wings. There was a sound from the firmament which was above their heads. When they stood still, they let down their wings. Again, this is some kind of a structure where the wings and the wheels are being described as part of their movement. The 26th verse, above the firmament that was over their heads. Now here again, we're being transported to higher and higher levels of reality, higher levels of consciousness. Above the firmament that was over their heads, like a vision of a sapphire, was the form of a throne. Now, this is the first time that this concept has been added to this vision. And it's obvious that this chariot is now moving, and it is going higher and higher. And now he sees the form of a throne. This throne, of course, will take on tremendous significance as we continue our series. And over the form of the throne, there was a form like a vision of a man on it from above. So here we have a supernal man sitting on this throne, which is towards the climax of his vision. Of course, we're going to have to understand who was this man sitting on the throne. The 27th verse, I saw a vision of the speaking silence, the chashmal. Now, if you remember, we spent nearly 2 entire classes discussing the chashmal. This is the second time chashmal is being spoken about. The chashmal came, I believe it was in the 5th verse, but we have not encountered the chashmal since then. But now that he is at the apex of this vision, now he comes in contact with the chashmal again. And that speaking silence was like a vision of fire, as a house for it around about, from the vision of his thighs and above. From the vision of his thighs and below, I saw a vision like fire with a glow around it. Noga. We've had this glow before. So really what's happening is some of the elements that Yechezkel encountered at the beginning of his vision, he's now encountering them again, but on a much, much higher level of consciousness. Now the 28th verse introduces an even more ethereal kind of image and vision. It says, like a vision of the rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so is the vision of the glow around. This was the vision of the form of God's glory. This is the first time that this phrase is introduced, God's glory. So we understand that he's at a very, very high level of consciousness now. He's now seen a throne. He sees a man sitting on it, but we're going to learn it's not so clear that it was a human being on this throne. And then he sees like a rainbow and the chashmal and a glow. And now he sees God's glory. Then Yechezkel says, now remember, this is the apex of his vision here. And it's taken us 6 weeks, but it's been one flow as far as his vision is concerned. But look what he says now. He says, I saw it and I fell on my face. And now this is the first time we see that Yechezkel is overwhelmed with the reality of what he is experiencing. And this is very, very common to many, if not most, of the prophets, that their reaction to the influx of divine energy causes them to be overwhelmed And many of them, it's described as that they fall on their face. Then Yechezkel says, then I heard a voice speak. That is the end of the first chapter of Ezekiel. But I'm only going to read the first 2 verses of the next chapter. So the second chapter opens. It said, he said, he heard a voice. This is the first time. This whole thing has been a vision of his, but he was having no contact in an audio way with God. But now it changes. And the voice, it said to me, Son of man, stand up on your feet, and I will speak to you. The second verse, then a spirit, a ruach, came in me, and it spoke to me. It stood me on my feet, and I heard that which spoke to me. And that is where we're going to stop for tonight. But I want to explain now how we're going to continue with this series. When discussing or learning about Maaseh Merkavah, usually we're dealing with the first chapter. But if you go through the first 11 chapters, the whole scene switches. But what happens is, and we're going to go over this, actually much more briefly than we've gone through the first chapter. But what we're going to see is God speaks to him many, many different things, gives him many different symbolic tasks to perform. Again, we'll discuss all of this. And then in a few instances, it brings us back to the same symbols of this vision. And it goes on for 11 chapters. It kind of concludes or peaks in the 10th and the 11th chapter. But the feeling that you get is that what's being described here is beyond time, because it's not clear in these 11 chapters. Even in the first chapter, we don't know how much time has elapsed. Did this vision happen in 5 minutes? Did it happen in 5 hours? And then when you go through the 11 chapters, some of the tasks that seemingly are given to Ezekiel last for years. And yet, Ezekiel comes back to this vision as if no time has passed, as if you're in the same vision. It's very mysterious, and it has very much to do with the relativity of time, the connection of time and consciousness. So tonight, we're going to get as far as we can, especially in describing the Chariot and the Ophanim, the 2 types of angels. Then we're going to continue with the next, up to the 11th chapter. And at that point, what I'm going to do is we'll have, in a certain way, finished the textual elements of the vision. And then I'm going to introduce throughout history how Maaseh Merkavah has been looked at, what are some of the texts that are connected to what's called Maaseh Merkavah, and especially a number of passages and stories in the Gemara, fascinating stories that have to do with Maaseh Merkavah, and with the incident that we've mentioned many times in different classes, Arba Shenichnasu Pardes, the 4 that went into, call it paradise, and how that is connected to Maaseh Merkavah. So I'm thinking there'll be another approximately 4 classes till we can bring all of this together. So now what I'm going to do is I want to share some of the commentaries that will hopefully help us understand what we've just read. Again, we're not going verse by verse. We're trying to understand the bigger picture here. So in the 15th verse, Yechezkel says, I saw the Chariot, the living beings. Hine ofen echad ba'aretz, etzel hachayot la'arbat panav. And behold, there was one open wheel angel on the earth next to each of the Chayot with the 4 that had 4 faces. So the commentaries, and this, I'm bringing this because this kind of shows that even the greatest of the commentaries, there were disagreements what he's trying to describe here. So some of them think that there was one open wheel angel next to each one of the 4 faces of the living being angels. Remember, we spent a lot of time analyzing the face of the ox and the lion, the eagle, and the human being. So in the verse, some of the commentaries think there's one open angel next to each of the 4 faces of the Chayot. Others say just the opposite. It's actually that the Ophanim also had 4 faces. And each one had 4 faces by the other ones. And here, again, we will truthfully never know. But I'm only bringing this just to show that if you go through the commentaries on every verse that we've learned, there will be different opinions of just trying to understand the very simple, literal meaning of what's being described, because it's obvious this is such a symbolic metaphor, allegory, symbolic language in its very depths. Okay, now remember it said that this structure, this Merkavah, had a back to it. And so one of the commentaries, I mean, he's called the Mitsudat David. And I found that he was one of the most clear of all of the commentaries. So what's the backs that he's seeing on this structure? So he says, Rotzel Lamar Haya lehen gav, haru'ui lehen lefi mar'ehen shayu b'demut ofanei ha'agalot. In other words, again, as I said, this is the first time that the commentaries are treating this vision as a chariot, that what is being described is an actual moving object. And here we're going to see that it's not only transporting Yechezkel, but as we're going to see, it's also transporting different levels of reality at the same time. So he goes on and he says that V'yomer al hachitzot hagavohot ha'alot mima'al la'ofanim. In other words, just like in a chariot, a person sitting there is going to lean against a back. That's what he's saying. It's like, this is like a real chariot. It has wheels, and it has to have a place for people or beings to sit. So that's what this back is. And then he says that this is above where the wheels were. Asher harochev ba yoshev sham, that the person who is riding on this chariot can sit there. Like between, and also it has sides. Like in a car, you have doors that shut because if you turn the corner, you might fall out. So he's just trying to give us a very literal explanation of what we read. And as I said, and I can't emphasize it enough, that this is the commentaries that are showing us the physical symbology of an actual chariot. Okay, now we said that it mentions a number of times a spirit that was going. So in the 20th verse, it says, Al asher yesham haruach lelechet yelchu shama. Haruach lelechet va'ofanim yinasu lumatam ki ruach hachaya va'ofanim. So this is very significant. It's saying that there's a ruach, a spirit that is animating this whole vision, really, and the movement of the vision. Because as we're going to see, Yechezkel in his vision is being transported to higher and higher levels of reality, the upper worlds, and his own consciousness. Excuse me. So here it says, Yechezkel says there he perceives a spirit, and the spirit of the Chariot was in the Ofanim. Now, what Rashi says is, when he describes this Ruach, he says, Haratzon shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now here, Rashi is adding a whole new dimension here, because up to now, except for in the beginning, where Yechezkel says that he was on the river Kavar, and he had visions of God. God has not come back into the text until actually later after this, but already Rashi is saying it's not only Yechezkel who is, as it were, riding this chariot. The Chariot and the Ofanim were also riding, not only they were the chariot, but they were also riding the chariot. And the spirit that is animating these angelic figures, Rashi tells us a very new idea. He says it was the Ratzon of Hashem. In other words, a very basic question here that we haven't totally explored is, how much of this is coming from Yechezkel and how much of it is coming into Yechezkel from above? The answer will be both. But what combination is not clear. As we learned from Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, so he's describing this, that all of everything Yechezkel is seeing is his mystical meditation that we're terming the chariot here, the workings of the chariot. But it's very clear that he's a prophet, and this is not just a figment of his own imagination. Because right from the beginning, it says he was having visions of God, meaning that God is obviously a big part of this vision. But up to now, Yechezkel has simply been describing his experience of what he is seeing, what he is experiencing. But here Rashi says that this Ruach that is permuting this whole vision. This is the Holy One, blessed be He. So then Rashi continues and he says that Rucho Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this spirit that Rashi just said, is the spirit that is animating this whole vision. B'chayot, this ruach of Hashem is in the chayot, the ruach hachaya ba'ofanim, and the spirit of the chayot is in the ofanim. In other words, here we're starting to see layers of reality, and right from the beginning we spoke about that different prophets had the vision of the chariot in different of the Kabbalistic worlds. This we've gone over many times, that Zechariah and Daniel, their vision of the chariot is coming from the world of Asiyah, the lowest of the worlds. And Yechezkel's vision is coming from the world of Yetzirah. Yeshayahu's is coming from the world of Bria, getting to the higher worlds, and only Moshe Rabbeinu was receiving his visions from the world of Atzilut, the world of emanation. But here, what Rashi is alluding to is, even though Yechezkel's vision is coming from the world of Yetzirah, they are worlds within worlds, just like, let's say, Sfirat Omer. We've discussed this with what's called inter-inclusion many times. We have Chesed, and we have Chesed Sheba Chesed, Gvura Sheba Chesed, Tiferet Sheba Chesed. In other words, all of the Sfirot are in all of the other Sfirot. And so here, what Rashi is saying is the Spirit of God are in the angels. The angels are messengers. They are vessels for God's energy, for God's message. When we confront angels in the Tanakh, in the Bible, we see that they're giving a message. They're messengers from God. And so here, Yechezkel is starting to experience, we've talked about this idea of the four faces that had four faces, that had four faces, that had four faces, up to 256 faces, possibly, as fractals, as inter-inclusion, and as enclothement, one level within another level. But now we're being introduced that God's Spirit is what's animating the chayot, the living beings, which is animating the wheel angels. And Yechezkel is now seeing this vision from higher and higher levels within the world of Yetzirah. A very, very important quote from the Maggid of Mezrich, when discussing these four Kabbalistic worlds. And the highest one is Atzilut, the world of emanation. And the Maggid said, Atzilut is also here. In other words, even though we relate to the spiritual worlds, the Kabbalistic worlds, as a hierarchy, one above the other, the Maggid of Mezrich was saying that may be true in certain circumstances, certain perspectives, but ultimately, all of the worlds are contained in this world. Just like we said about Chesed. There's Chesed Sheba Chesed, there's Gevurah Sheba Chesed, there's Tiferet Sheba Chesed. So all of the worlds are contained in all the other worlds. And that is what Yechezkel is experiencing here. Now, the Metzudak David continues with this idea, and it says, Ala makom asher yesh shama ratzon meha kel yitbarach harochev ba. So he says that in this place where there is the will of God, this is coming from, obviously, from God himself, who is riding harochev ba lelechet yelchu achayot ki shama gama ratzon me'achayot lelechet. So he's saying that he's really repeating what Rashi says in his own words, is that God, in a sense, is now riding the Merkavah, because his spirit is in the Chayot, which are in the Ofanim. That is what is animating this entire vision. And that is what Yechezkel is starting to see. In the beginning, he was seeing angels, and he was seeing they had faces and they had wings, and they moved this way and they moved that way. Now, Yechezkel is becoming aware of God's ever-presence in these details of what he's witnessing, what he's experiencing. Now, we're coming to his vision of the throne and the man on the throne. Again, we're only going to start with this tonight. This is something we're going to have to go into even deeper later. But this is from the 26th verse, where it says, asher al rosham. He says, and above the firmament that was above their heads, meaning the different angels and this Merkavah that is traveling, Kimareh Evan Sapir, there was like the appearance of a sapphire stone. Demut Kisei, and this sapphire stone had an appearance of being a throne. Bial Demuta Kisei, and on the appearance of a throne, Demut Kamare Adam, the appearance of the likeness of a Adam, a human being, Allah milamala. Now, if you followed in Hebrew and English, it says over and over, like an appearance, somewhat similar to a sapphire stone. And that sapphire stone kind of had an image of a kisei. In other words, this is what we've discussed already, that all of the prophets saw their vision through what's called an asplakaria lo me'ira, an unclear pane. And this verse, more than any other verse, he uses the verb, the appearance or the image of, over and over again. In other words, the message is that whatever he's seeing, it's not crystal clear. He's seeing images, he's seeing approximations, he's seeing visions of. As we said, only Moshe Rabbeinu is seeing through an asplakaria hami'ira, a clear, pure pain with no distortions. Okay, so the Metzira David is now going to say something very important. He says, Rotzeh lamar, ra'iti devar mazhir ke'evan sapir. It is to say that I saw, this is Yechezkel speaking, I saw something that was shining like a sapphire stone. But who could demut kisei? And it was like the image of a throne. The al demuta kisei, and on the image of a throne, ra'iti demut mimare adam. I saw again, in double language, the approximate image of a similarity of an Adam, ala kiseis, on the throne, mima'al, from above. Now listen what he says here. He says, Hu remez al ha'el yitbarach. This is a hint to God himself, where it says that he sees a man. He says this is really alluding to God himself who is sitting on the throne. V'omer demut kamar'eh lomar she'en lo demut klal. And that's why the Metzudah David says that's why this word image or approximation or something like is repeated over and over in this verse to teach us that God has no image. And so when Yechezkel is seeing a man, it's through like all of these frosted panes. And what he sees is like the image of a man. But the Metzudah David says that it's really an image of God. But since God has no image, so this is the best that Yechezkel is able to perceive. Aval amru b'lashon demut, but that's why it's said in the language of approximation. Lahasbir et ha'ozen shero'et ha'shechina. This is to get our ear, like we're reading this text, we're hearing the words of Yechezkel in a way that it is getting us ready to really understand what he's seeing is Hashechina, the actual divine presence. Nosat, that is traveling. Mibeit HaMikdash, Kemelech HaYoshev B'kisei ala Merkavah. That is what he is seeing. He's now seeing a throne, but the throne is being transported by the Merkavah. And that's what he says here. And what he's really seeing is the Shekhinah. But since the Shekhinah has no physical image, and the words of the text is only trying to get us to understand that through all of these veils, he's seeing a man, but it's really the Shekhinah. But listen to these words. Nosa'at mibeit HaMikdash kamelech hayoshev b'kisei ala Merkavah. That God is traveling from the Beit HaMikdash like a king who is sitting on his throne on a chariot. So this is one of the most explicit commentaries that we've had up to now that is solidifying this whole vision with the term we were using, the workings of the chariot, the Ma'aseh Merkavah. But what is interesting here, he says that God is traveling from the Beit HaMikdash. And that we'll really only understand in chapters 2 through 11. Because what we're going to see is the thrust of everything that God is now sharing with Yechezkel is about the imminent destruction of the temple. And this goes back to the very first verse of the book of Ezekiel, where he says that he is in exile. And we learn that Yechezkel was taken away from Jerusalem approximately 10 years before the temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. And that much of the book of Ezekiel is in those 10 years between these visions that he's having and God making him a prophet to warn the people of what is about to happen if they don't change their ways. So here, the Metzudah David brings in that he is seeing a vision of God leaving the temple. And that, again, is only an introduction to what's going to happen in verses 2 through 11. And in a certain way, the whole rest of the book of Ezekiel. Now, we're going back to Rashi, when we learned in the 27th verse that once again, Yechezkel is seeing the chashmal, this energy of the chashmal. And Rashi says something incredible here. He says on the words, and I saw the chashmal, Rashi says, Lo natan reshut lehitbonen b'mikre zeh. Rashi says an absolute incredible thing here. Here, this is Rashi, who's famous for explaining everything in the Chumash and the Gemara, and whether he's giving the simple understanding or a more alluded to meaning, or the Midrash, as we've discussed, even though Rashi it's attributed to him that he came, in his own words, he said, I only came to explain the simple meaning of the text. But everyone comments that when you actually read Rashi, probably half of Rashi, he's quoting the Midrash, which is not Pshat, it's Drush. But here Rashi says at this part of the vision, when Ezekiel is seeing once again the chashmal, but here on a very, very high level, Rashi says, basically said, I do not have permission to contemplate this verse. Rashi is saying, this is beyond me. This is beyond me, and I don't have permission, meaning he felt either from the rabbis or from above. Now we have to understand that it's understood by almost everyone that Rashi wrote his commentary in a state called Ruach HaKodesh, with divine inspiration. Rashi is the deepest of the deep. And here, Rashi is saying, here, I don't have permission to delve into trying to explain the chashmal that's being described right here. I just thought that was just an amazing Rashi to share. Now, again, on the words, hu mar'eh, this, he saw an image of a throne and an image of, this is even before he sees the person on it, the Adam. So the Metzudah David says like this, Hamareh hazeh shera'iti hu mar'eh demut kavod Hashem. And the vision that I saw, meaning Yechezkel saw, this is the approximation of the image of the glory of God, which we saw, it was in the text. Ki ra'ehu nosea mi beit hamikdash kedemut melech yoshev ala Merkavah v'nosea. So he just repeating that Yechezkel is seeing God sitting on a throne in the Merkavah, leaving the Beit HaMikdash. And with that, we finish the commentaries of trying to understand this. I see that this has taken a substantial amount of time. So I'm going to probably go a little bit later, because I do want to get through some of the explanations of the Chariot. as I said, that our main purpose right now is to understand who the Chayot are and who the Ofanim are, and the relationship. And then we will go to deeper levels next week, especially with the Ofanim, hopefully to whet your appetite that I found in the teachings of Rav Ginsburg, teachings that in a certain way will transform our whole understanding of what is being described in this vision on a whole other level. I was so excited when I was able to find these teachings and see their relevancy to this whole series of classes. That we will only get to next week. So I hope I whetted your appetite. But for right now, let's understand what we can about the Chayot. The Chayot are translated as living beings. Excuse me. Sorry. Chayot comes from the word chai, living, life. These chayot in this vision, these are angels. But what are angels? Angels are energy forces. They are being described here and in other places as having some kind of physical forms. Here they have 4 faces, they have 4 wings. The wings cover a certain part of their spiritual bodies. In Isaiah, he also describes angels, and different angels have different tasks, but the physical descriptions of angels are very, very symbolic. And here, these angels are called Chayot because they are living transmitters of energy, of information. We've discussed it in quantum physics today, that you have matter. Matter is basically energy, and that energy, from a Torah perspective, is the light of God, and the light of God is a manifestation of pure information, coded information. And so when you look into quantum physics today, that is the way they describe all of reality. It's at this point, quantum physics is in a certain way going beyond the outer shell of matter and even the outer shell of energy. And it's talking about energy being a manifestation of coded information. We say every day in our prayers, "Kulam bechachma asita." You made everything in wisdom. And that wisdom is the structure of reality. And again, for those who have come to all of the classes, and especially next week, we're going to get into it at a deeper level, that what Yechezkel is explaining here and what he's experiencing is the actual structure of all of reality, all of the spiritual world and the physical world. So these chayot, they are life force transmitters. That's really who these angels are. The word angel is malach. Malach has a gematria of 91. This number we've encountered in many different classes. 91 is a combination of the four-letter name of God, the way it's written, a yud and a hey and a vav and a hey, equals 26. And the way that we pronounce it, which is Adonai, Aleph and Dalet and Nun and Yud, which is 65. So 26 and 65 is 91. Every time that we say God's name, this gematria is really the four-letter name of God is enclosed in the name Adni. And that's what an angel is, because the angel has the same gematria. An angel is a messenger. And actually in quantum physics today, when they talk about different particles are literally called messenger particles because they are transmitting energy. That is their function of those particles. That is what an angel is doing here. And so Yechezkel, he is seeing Chariot. Now, what we're told is that there are different degrees of angels. There are different versions of the different degrees of angels, but the one that is very accepted is that in the world of Asiyah, the world of action, this world, the material world, the angels of this world are called Ophanim. That these are the other angels that we are going to be discussing. The wheel angels. The angels of the world of Yetzirah, the world that Yechezkel is viewing the Maaseh Merkavah, they are called Chayot. So that's why here in the Merkavah that Yechezkel is experiencing, it says that the spirit of the Chayot are in the Ophanim, because he's seeing the inter-inclusion of two worlds, the world of Asiyah and the world of Yetzirah. In the higher world of Bria, those kind of angels are called Seraphim. And these are the angels that are described in Isaiah's description of the Merkavah. There, they're called the angels that he is experiencing in the world of Bria are the fire angels, the Seraphim, Seraph, they're burning angels. At a certain point, I will introduce you to a meditation that is part of our daily prayers that bring these three different types of angels together: Ophanim, Chayot, and Seraphim. We will get to that. The Chayot, in all of the descriptions of Yechezkel, are always associated with fire. Their energy, their chiyut, their life force is full of fire. And especially in the parts that we read today, because we just mentioned that the angels of the higher world of Bria are called Seraphim, fire angels, burning angels. So as we said, Yechezkel is now experiencing all of the worlds, all of the different types of angels. And then on this Merkavah, God is writing from the world of emanation, from Atzilut. And so here Yechezkel is experiencing all of the worlds, the inter-inclusion of all of the worlds, the enclosement of all of the worlds are being experienced at one time. So I want to end tonight, and the next week we will go into the Ophanim. But a very, very interesting thing is, for those who have my book, Fruits of the Orchard, The article that I'm referring to is in the book of Bereshit, in the Parsha of Vayechi, and you could read the whole article. It's called Animals, Humans, and Angels. And this is a very, very important way to put together a lot of what we've been saying. If we go back in the vision, when Yechezkel first started to describe the Chariot and their connection with fire, he first says that when he first sees the Chariot, they had an image of a Adam, of a human being. And then he describes the four faces, that each one of these Chariot that had the image of a human being, one of the faces was a human being. And then it says that they had wings, but under the wings was the image of two hands, human hands. And so we already discussed that the vision that Yechezkel is having is a composite in a certain way of angel and human being. And this is part of his whole meditation that brings him to this vision in the first place, is that the word for Adam, the Aleph, represents the divine soul, or the more angelic part of a human being, and the Dam is the blood, is the lower soul, is the body. So this is being seen by Yechezkel in his vision, that these angels they're angels, but they're part human beings. They have hands, they have an image of a human being. So if we go back into the story of creation, the first time that the word chaya, living being, is used is the creation of actually fish and then animals. They are called nefesh chaya. They are called living beings, and the beings are called nefesh here. When Adam is created, he's also called a nefesh chaya. So here we see a connection that animals are called nefesh chaya. Remember, nefesh is the lowest level of soul. We have nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya. We'll get to that. Yechida, 5 levels of soul: the animal soul, the emotional component of a human being, the intellectual, the will, and the spark of God within us. 5 levels of the soul. So here in the creation story, animals are called nefesh chaya and human beings are called nefesh chaya. The difference is when I believe it's the 4th verse of the 2nd chapter, when the human being is being created, God blows into the human being a nishmat chayim, nishmat chayim, the soul of life. And that is what makes a human being different than an animal, but a human being has animal qualities. And now we have a whole group of angels that are called chayot. So we have animals, humans, and angels all share this word chayot. Now, when we looked at the 5 levels of soul, nefesh, ruach, neshama, then we have chaya. So this is one of the higher levels of soul of a human being. According to our understanding, animals do not have these higher levels of soul. They have a nefesh, an animal soul, and perhaps a ruach, a kind of emotional soul. But they do not have a neshama or a chaya or yechida. But what the chaya is described for a human being, this is what's called the seat of will, of ratzon. But there's a difference between the ratzon, the will of an animal, and a will of a human being, and a will of an angel. An animal has a very strong will. It's programmed for survival and pleasure. That is what an animal is programmed. Its existence is to survive. Part of the survival is to reproduce. And pleasure. A human being also has ratzon and also has a will to survive, to reproduce, and to have pleasure. But a human will also entails purpose. Viktor Frankl became famous for introducing this idea in a modern sense. Of course, in Torah and Kabbalah and Chassidut, the idea of human willpower is critical. But he introduced this idea of the will to have purpose as the very core of a human being. Angels also have a will, but not free will. Their will is programmed to do the will of God. And that's why they're called messengers. Angels are messengers to do God's will. And so here, just to wrap this up, angels, humans, and animals all share certain qualities, but there are differences between them. And a human being, in a certain way, is in the middle. A human being, like we said from the word Adam, the Aleph is the more angelic or divine aspect of a human being. Dam is blood, the body, and the lower animal soul. But the lower animal soul is not bad. It just needs to be, in a certain way, like an animal, needs to be trained and put into the proper focus and directed. One of the highest expressions of human free will is at Mount Sinai when we said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will understand. Meaning, we'll do even before we understand. God, whatever you direct us to do, we will do. We trust you. We believe in you, and we believe that whatever you tell us to do will be for the good. The commandments will be for our good and will have a purpose to them. And the commentaries say, the Midrash says, a voice came out of heaven when Israel said, Na'aseh v'nishma, and said, who taught human beings the secret of the angels? Because the angels are programmed to do. If they understand, good. But they're programmed to do. They do God's will. And so a human being is in the middle in a certain way. It shares the qualities of animals. Animals have some wonderful qualities, tremendous qualities, and of angels. And I just want to end with, actually what I should have started with, truthfully, is we see something very interesting. And this will just kind of show what we've been talking about. In Yaakov and Moshe's blessings to the tribes before they pass away, they bless all of the tribes. And it's amazing how many times the metaphor of animals is used in the blessings. And I'm just going to do this really, really quickly. That a lion cub is, these are from, the first ones are from Yaakov, when he's talking about Yehuda. Says, a lion cub is Judah. From the prey, my son, you withdrew. He crouched, rested like a lion, and like a lion, who will rouse him? by Yisachar. Yisachar is a bony donkey. Now, obviously, the usage of animals here is highly symbolic of certain qualities that animals have that these tribes are being blessed with. As I said, animals have some wonderful qualities. Yisachar is a bony donkey lying between the boundaries. Dan will be like a serpent on the road, a viper on the path. Naphtali is a swift gazelle. Benjamin is like a wolf. And then in Moshe's blessings, he says, his first glory is his. His horns are the horns of a ra'im. Again, in the commentaries, he explained the usage of the imagery of animals. God is also called like a lion, and so is Dan in the blessings of Moshe. So in a certain way, I should have started with that, but here we see that there's a deep connection in this word, chaya, chayot, the living beings. They're living beings who are animals, they're living beings who are humans, and they're living beings that are angels. And they all have chiyut, life force, and they all share in certain degrees different qualities. There's certain qualities that are less good. Nonetheless, this just is putting together very much part of this vision of Yechezkel. As I said before, when he first describes the Chayot, he says they have an image of an Adam, of a human being. And he sees him with four faces, one which is a human being, and as we mentioned, the lion, the ox, and the eagle, and the eagle has a snake tail. They are all part of the blessings that the tribes got. They're all part of them. And so Yechezkel is, in a certain way, projecting his inner qualities, and what he's seeing is partly coming from himself. And because he is part animal, part human, and part angel, and part God. And that's why later, when he sees who is sitting on the throne, he sees a human being. But we learned that what he was really seeing was God, but God has no image. So the closest that he can come to in his own experience is of the vision of an Adam, because that is part of who he is. So part of this dream is coming from the very depths of the prophet's own states of consciousness, and other parts are coming directly from God, messages from God, images that God is planting. So just like it says that the ruach that is in the chayot is in the ofanim, and we learned that the ruach is the ratzon of Hashem, the will of Hashem. The chaya, the life force of Hashem, is in the chayot. The chayot are in the ofanim, and all of it is within a human consciousness. And that is what Yechezkel is giving over here, obviously in highly symbolic terms. But what we're trying to do is to get to the essence of why Maaseh Merkavah has such an important part of Jewish tradition. Because if you just read the text in English or Hebrew, we're not going to understand very much. But with the help of the commentaries and deep thought and contemplation, what we're seeing is world within world within world, levels of consciousness within levels of consciousness within levels of consciousness. L'chaim, everyone. L'chaim. L'chaim.